till now we were talking about symptom control, but now we are moving on to another important topic, which we usually don't have much idea, even during our undergraduate or postgraduate days. And we know that there are many mishaps in many hospitals with doctors, nurses, and hospital staffs. And many of the problem can be avoided or prevented
Dr. Sunil, we can't hear you, sir.
and he has been working in palliative care around for 20 years. And right now he is working in Rajagiri Hospital, Alva, as the head of the department and consultant. Dr. Biju Raghavan and myself were colleagues and are friends. And so Biju has a special interest in communication session, and I hope you will enjoy this session. Biju, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. As usual, a pleasure to be part of Pallium India program. And as Sunil said, me and Sunil go a long way back. We met in 2004, and since then we have been colleagues and friends. So thank you, Sunil, for the kind introduction. Great to see you again. So if Rajalakshmi permits, we can start sharing the screen. Thank you. So medical communication is in two parts. Today we are only going to do part one, and at the end of the session I will mention what we are going to do in part two. So let us get on with part one. So today we are going to cover the importance and role of communication in healthcare. We are, as practicing healthcare providers, each one of us are communicating day in and day out. However, communication skills has not been part of our medical education. It has not been part of our curriculum, at least in India. That is kind of slowly changing nowadays, but still there's a lot to learn. I came upon communication skills during my training in pain and palliative medicine, and that was quite an eye-opener. Then we will also talk about some of the barriers to communication, and as it's mentioned, some of the things that you must do and some of the things that we should not do. And we will revisit history taking, but focusing on how to be a better communicator. So I'm calling it history taking 2.2. Next slide, please. So what we have to understand is when people come to us, they are not coming to us because they want to come to us. They come to us because they find themselves sick, they find themselves in pain, they find themselves not well. And that is the reason they have to come to us, not because they like coming to the doctor or the hospital. So the starting point itself is kind of negative. And as a result, uh, this can be quite challenging. How we deal with patients and their family members is very challenging because they have not come for a picnic or a time for a positive experience. They are here because they are already in a negative experience. So that is where the challenge lies. And whether you have done a good job or not, you may think you have done a good job, or your hospital management that may think that they have provided all the facilities, the latest gadgets, etc., etc. But whether you have done a good job lies in the eyes of the beholder. In this case, the patient and the family. They are the ones who are deciding whether we are doing a good job or not. And hence, in healthcare communication, the challenge is that we have to make sure that we are ensuring satisfaction at the patient and family's end. Next slide. So patient satisfaction, this was a study which came up a long time back in 86, and it's still very, very valid. This was about headache. It came in the Journal of Family Physicians, and the study was that the best predictor for resolution of headache problem turned out to be the patient's perception that they had an opportunity to tell their story and discuss their concern about the headache fully with their physicians during the first visit. What that means is if we are able to give them a sense that they have been listened to, then it helps in therapeutics also. It definitely is important for satisfaction. It also has a positive outcome, a positive aspect on outcomes. Next slide, please. And we all know a lot of medical errors happen, and many of them serious errors. And what they found is communication or the lack of communication or poor communication results in the majority of medical errors which are happening in healthcare, around 60 to 70%. And simple to suggest that if we do good communication, the majority of medical errors can be prevented. However, it is not that easy because communications is quite a complex skill to gain, and that is why we are having this kind of problems. Next slide. And there is a financial outcome also of poor communication, and this came up in 2010 where this is a study done in US, and what they found that the hospital lost an average of $12.3 billion each year due to communication inefficiency. So there is a cost to poor communication. Now, as individual doctors, nurses, we may not be aware of it, but at the management level, this is very, very important. And we are all together in it. Next slide. Now, what happens is from the time you enter medical college or nursing college, you are tested repeatedly at every level on your knowledge, on your medical knowledge, on your skills, and your ability to solve a problem, come to a diagnosis, plan a management. And all these things are checked and rechecked, and that is the reason you end up with a degree. However, at many of these areas, our ability to communicate with the patient, with the family, our colleagues, with others, they are not tested. And as a result, a very important component of healthcare practice, there's a big vacuum. And since we are not taught this, we are not even aware what is right and what is not right. And that is why we may think we are doing a good job, but in the eyes of the beholder, that is the patient and family, however hard we may be working, whatever sacrifices we may be making, they just don't seem to be very satisfied. So the problem is not on our knowledge or skill as far as the medical part is concerned. Many a times it is our lack of communication skills which creates the problem. Next slide. So when we talk about doctor-patient relationship, and I include the family also in it, essentially the clinical relationship, there are multiple aspects to it. A good communication helps in better diagnosis, accuracy of diagnosis. And if you understand the patient's background, then you can give them a most appropriate prescription. It may not be the best prescription, but you can give them a prescription which they will comply with, or a management that they will comply with. So it is sometimes it is important to have a discussion regarding the management. with the patient and the family, and so that we know what is it that they can comply with and what is it that they can't comply with. So a good communication helps with better outcome because patient complies with it. And if there is good outcome, the patient and the family will be satisfied. And if you have a happy patient and happy family, naturally your team will also be happy because they are not subjected to stress as a result of an unhappy patient and an unhappy family. This also has a bearing on patient safety, which I mentioned in the previous slides regarding the errors in our healthcare practice. Good communication reduces the error and as a result enhances patient safety. And all of this has an implication on our peace of mind. Otherwise, we all know today how healthcare professionals are sued, and in many places they are not sued, but they are just physically harmed. So a lot of these kind of things which takes away our peace of mind can also be taken care of by good communication. So there is a multifaceted aspect to good communication in the clinical setting. Next slide. So the obvious question, I mean, I have already answered this. So why should we learn good communication? You would have realized by now how important and how crucial it is in our healthcare practice. So next slide. So what is it in for us? What's in it for us? If we learn good communication skills, so there will be better compliance with management. As a result, we will get better outcomes. And naturally, if we have better outcomes, it improves our standing in society. It gives us happiness. And good relationship with the patient and family and with our colleagues and our team has an important impact on better peace of mind, less stress. And all of this will have an impact on professional achievement. It is up to an individual healthcare provider how they want to define their professional achievement. For some, it may be more of material gain. For some, it may be more of academic gain. Or for some, it may be standing in society. It could be anything. You define what you think is achievement. But whatever be your definition, good communication skills will help you achieve it. Next slide. And what's in it for the patient and family? Very obvious. It helps reduce the uncertainty. They don't know what is going to happen. They don't know where to go, what to do, whom to see, etc., etc. So if we communicate properly in a language that they can understand, it reduces a lot of uncertainty. And once your uncertainty comes down, a lot of emotional stress also comes down. A lot of anxiety, panic, anger, etc. also comes down. And it helps the family plan because they know what direction things are going, whether it's going in a good way or do we have alternative options, whether it's going in a bad way and there are not much options. So all of these things and honest communication helps the patient and family understand where they are headed, and as a result it allows them to plan for the future. Next slide. And for society at large, remember that we all, as medical healthcare providers, we know that medical matters are very complicated. And it is not an exact science like mathematics or physics. In maths, 1 plus 1 is always 2. In medical, in biology, it need not be. There are no two fingerprints which match. So how can two pathologies be exactly the same? And how can the outcomes of their management be the same? So as healthcare providers, we understand it, but society does not. So it is very important that we as good communicators helps improve the society's understanding of medical issues so that a lot of unrealistic expectations from us is taken care of. It is a lot of unrealistic expectation which leads to a lot of friction between the general public and the healthcare professionals. So it's in our best interest to improve the society's understanding of medical issues so that their misconceptions and unrealistic expectations are brought down to at par with reality. And as a result, we can try to create a harmonious relationship between society and medical professionals. This is the need of the hour because we see every day, at least before the corona thing came up, nowadays healthcare professionals are hailed as corona warriors and etc. etc. Suddenly we are in the limelight in a positive way, but this phase will also pass away. So, and we'll be back to the good old days where there was such a big friction between medical professionals and society. So, all a good communication will help create a harmonious relationship. So, each one of us has the responsibility that each patient and family that comes into our room, we try our best effort to improve their awareness about their condition and do the best in communication we can do. It is just not good enough to be great prescription writers. We are, as doctors, we are just not prescription vending machines. We have to be doctors in the real sense, that is, a friend, guide, and philosopher to our patients and family. And that involves a fair bit of communication. Next slide, please. So coming to some of the barriers, this presentation will not give you all the barriers. I'm just touching upon a few of them. Next slide. Environment as a barrier or miscellaneous things as barrier. Nowadays we talk about technology. Right now this session is being conducted on Zoom, but we know there are many people who do not have competence with technology, or they do not have material support or means to use technology. So technology, even though it is great for communication, it may not be equitably accessible to all sections. Next slide. So time, lack of privacy, physical barriers, next, noise distraction, technology. So all, go back please. So all of these things can be a barrier. And now as far as time is concerned, we know as healthcare providers, time is of the essence. So we also need to learn time management. And one of the time management skills that we have been taught in the healthcare environment is triaging. When there is a mass casualty, we know how to triage. And please remember, time management is a team sport. It is not an individual person's capability. It is a team sport where we allocate responsibility so that every work gets done in time. So when I say time management, it is not the responsibility of one person. It is a collective responsibility. So we have to build team. We have to empower our team. We have to empower our colleagues, and so that each one of us can perform to the best of their potential, and time can be taken care of. There are very many ways of taking care of privacy. We can have we can have a curtain, or the basic idea is we have to create an illusion of privacy, even if there is no absolute privacy. And physical barriers, we just have to rearrange how our office space is so that we can, become more accessible. Remove the physical barrier between you and the person in front of you, and that will also improve communication. And of course, we must learn how to have a good phone etiquette while we are in our clinical environment. Good phone etiquette, that in case you get a phone, you have to take it, but you can always ask the person sitting in front of you, I have to take this call, just give me 1 minute. That is good enough. Next slide, please. Sometimes your patient can be very timid in nature. They may be coming from a socioeconomic background, which makes them feel fearful to be in the presence of a doctor or a healthcare provider or in a big hospital. So they may not tell all the information. We have to make them comfortable by offering them a seat to sit down and make them comfortable and confident enough to tell you all of their issues. And many times our behavior may suggest that we are very, very busy. We may actually be busy, However, it may be counterproductive, because if you want to get all the information, remember, knowledge is power. And if you have the knowledge, you have the power to make a good decision. So if you have this idea of getting all this information that you need, then you have to change your body language. You have to make sure that you are not conveying a message that you're very busy by being fidgety with your files or computer while the patient and family is sitting in front of you. Right? Give them the full attention by your body language, making eye contact, your body position towards them, so that they know that you are there listening to them. And make sure that you also ask question about what they do and are they having any financial difficulties, so that they feel free to talk about their social situation, so that you have a clear, better idea of what they can afford, what they cannot afford. And I said earlier that it is not the best prescription that will have a good outcome. It is the most practical prescription that will get you a good result. And for that, you need to know their practical life and practical difficulties. Sometimes we may deal with some diseases which affect communication. For example, somebody had a stroke and a dysarthria, or somebody has a hearing problem, etc., etc. So those are special areas, and we all need to adapt our skills so that we are able to cope up with that kind of situation. I'm not going into every detail because this is not the forum for that. Next slide, please. So can we be barriers? Next slide. Sometimes our appearance itself can scare our patient and families. And especially nowadays with Corona, we are all covered up, just like me over here. And I'm sure many of you are also, if you are working right now, you may be in the hospital and you may be having a face mask, etc. So a lot of these things can scare or at least make our patients uncomfortable. But please remember, it is not these inanimate objects which create the problem. It is also our attitude. When we wear all of this, how our body reacts, how our expressions, or how our voice reacts. I am realizing these days that when we are all the time wearing mask, we are very less communicative. We are not saying hello, how are you, etc. on passing. Before, when we were not wearing mask, we used to smile and say hi more often. Nowadays, we are doing it much less. That is my personal experience. I don't know whether that is the case with you also. When you wear a mask, our tendency to just say casual hellos is coming down. So all of these things affect our appearance, and as a result, it can make the patient and family uncomfortable. So the important point is that we can't help our appearance, but we can improve upon our body language and ability in communicating. We will come to that a little later. Next slide. Attitude, go on. So these are some of the negative attitudes which is not helpful in good communication. The only way to go about it is to realize that and try to develop some positive attitude. You have to understand that it is important and we have to make an effort to learn good communication skills. Next slide. And this is the sad part, because most of the medical colleges that teach MBBS or nursing, or for that matter postgraduate degrees, the emphasis on communication skills is not there. There is no fixed curricula, and even during our clinical postings, some of our teachers are great communicators, but at the same time there are also some problems also, and we learn and we practice those things, and as a result it is not enough to have just the good chance of being with great communicators. We all deserve to be taught good communication. It cannot be left on chance. That's why it is tragic. But now I think the government is changing. They are creating some changes in the medical curriculum, and hopefully the next generation will have it better, easier than the previous generations. Next slide, please. So coming to some do's and don'ts. Next slide. So even if you are wearing a mask, and a shield or a goggle, still make eye contact. And even if your smile can't be seen from because you're wearing a mask, still smile behind the mask because some of that smile can be seen in your eyes, and definitely there will be a smile in your voice if you're actually smiling. Because if you have a grumpy face, you cannot have a happy voice. If you're actually smiling, it will show in your voice. And that is really going to help with communication. So make eye contact, smile, and talk because that smile will come out in the voice and in your eyes. Next slide. So do not categorize or label people. Bed number 34 is a big scratch. That's kind of a very common way of giving a handover. That's a VIP patient, beware. So we have to understand that we have to stop categorizing people because nobody's all the time nice, nobody's all the time bad. Within 24 hours, each one of us have different sides to us. So don't categorize anybody. Be non-judgmental, accept people as they are, and also respect people for who they are. It's very important, these two parts. And remember, just look at that picture of that doctor by the side of that young child. He is not standing and hovering over the child. He has brought down, he is on his knees, leveling his eyes at the level of the child. So that is showing respect when you bring yourself at the level of your patient. So when if it's a patient who has come to and the family which has come to your office in the OP, offer them a chair so that we are at level. If you go to the IP for rounds, pull up a chair or a stool, sit down so that the level is the same. And if it is a child you are meeting, always bend at the knee so that you are at level with them. Do not bend at the hips so that you are hovering over that child as if you are a Gulliver and the child is a Lilliput. No, always keep things at level. That is the best way of aligning yourself for good communication. Next slide. Your pain is better, isn't it? When you say something like that, it becomes very difficult for the patient to say, no, no, my pain is the same, your medicine did not help me. The patient will find it very difficult to say that. Instead of that, you can say, how is your pain? Or how are you feeling today? Then the patient can say, I still have pain here, etc., etc. So the person will feel more emboldened to tell you the truth. So never use leading question, always ask open-ended question. Next slide. So for every person, their problem is the biggest problem in the world. As healthcare providers, we may be seeing n number of misery, n number of pain, and we may be used to it. But for the person who has come to us with their pain or their breathlessness or whatever they are suffering, for them, their problem is the biggest problem. Do not minimize it. Do not say you are just getting worried about such a small problem. Do not minimize it. And definitely do not compare their problem with somebody else's, saying, oh, look at that person or look at that patient. They are suffering so much. Compared to that, yours is nothing. It does not help anything. It only makes them feel very bad, right? So do not minimize or compare anybody's problem. What we have to do is acknowledge the emotion that the person is displaying and tell them that how they are feeling is normal for the circumstances they are in. And so this simple thing will help you gain their trust and their friendship. And if the patient and party are on your side, it is always good for you. So you can say something like anybody in your position would perhaps feel this way. And you know, and you normalize their emotional experience by considering what you're going through. It's normal to feel this way. This, please, this I would emphasize. Never minimize or compare people problem. Acknowledge them and acknowledge their emotion and tell them how you're feeling. It's not necessary we are talking about pathology. We are talking about patients' emotions here. And please remember, the communication skills is all about giving satisfaction to how patients feel and their families feel. It is not at the logical level, it is at the emotional level. It's at the heart level, not at the brain level. And those who are good communicators will always make their patient and family feel good. That is where the winning formula lies. Next slide, please. Do not give false hopes. Even if the situation is very bad, you have a patient with multiple metastasis, advanced malignancy, don't tell them everything will be all right. No, because tomorrow when they come with worse symptoms, then what will you do? So always give them realistic hope. Tell them what you can do and what you cannot do. And when the best part of this course in palliative medicine is that this course will empower you, because whichever course you are doing, as far as diagnosis and therapeutics is concerned, there is always a limit to what you can do. In palliative medicine, there is no limit. There is always something that you can do for the patient in the hopeless of the most hopeless situation. There is always something to be done. So that is why palliative medicine really empowers you. You will never have to say nothing more from my side. But whatever you give the hope, it has to be something that you can do. It has to be a realistic hope. Next slide, please. Very important. Do not assume. It's very easy to assume things when we have a patient or the family in front of them and they say, I'm feeling so worried. Ask them, what are they worried about? Ask and they will tell you. Now, this is the most important message I want you to consider. Do not assume. When people say, express that they are worried, express they are sad, express that they are angry, express that they are scared, whatever they say, do not assume. Ask them, why did you say that? And when they tell you the reason, you may be surprised. You may never have thought of that. And many a times when people tell them what they're worried about, it is also possible that you may not have any solution, any answers for their problems, but that is okay. The important thing that you have done, the important thing that you have done is you gave them an opportunity to ventilate their concerns. You listen to them, and listening has a therapeutic, it's a healing process. It helps in healing. When you allow people to ventilate, when you allow them to talk, it helps them heal inside, even if there is no solution to the problem, right? So when we are listening, don't think you're wasting time. There is a lot of healing that goes on along with listening. Next slide. And how can I cannot emphasize enough about human touch. In these days of corona, we are very afraid. In the initial months of March, April, and May, I was also very afraid of touching. Suddenly, even though I'm a palliative care physician and a great part of my communication was also about human touch, suddenly I was also afraid. But over a period of time, I have found the courage. And of course, I take precaution. I sanitize my hands, I wear mask, I wear a face shield when I go to see a patient, and I also touch them. And after touching them, in front of them itself, I sanitize my hands again. But what I'm saying is, do not forget the human touch. There is nothing more therapeutic than a human touch. And practice human touch with every patient. Just the act of taking your step and putting on the patient's body itself has a lot of therapeutic value to it, even though there is no reason for you to put a stent on a person's body. You know, the person, for all sake, may have a knee pain, but just this act of taking a stent, and that is also about human touch. I'm saying that you don't have to depend on your stent for a human touch. What I'm saying is that always practice human touch. It has a lot of healing property. Each one of us has a divine power within us, that our body can be an instrument of healing. If, as healthcare providers, we must practice that. And of course, don't forget yourself. Take good care of yourself. Burnout is very common in healthcare professionals. And when we say burnout, many doctors think, oh, I am fine. But remember, just think of how our behavior has been. Are we irritable all the time? Are we complaining all the time? Are we not calm and peaceful and happy in our workplace? If all of that is there, perhaps we are experiencing a bit of burnout. So before you help your patients, help yourself. Be kind to yourself. Take good care of yourself. And some of the ways we can do it is a bit of physical activity. A bit of physical activity is very good. A bit of meditation. If we don't want to do any meditation, at least a bit of contemplation. Think about some deep thoughts. Why am I here? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of life? Etc. etc. And have some hobbies. Get back to nature. Listen to some music. Have a pet if you like pets. Whatever it is, whatever gives you happiness, apart from your domestic life and professional life, have something else to look forward to, and stay connected. When I say stay connected, it is not just with your patient families, colleagues. Stay connected with family, extended family. Stay connected with nature. Stay connected with God, if you believe in one, or stay connected with divine, or stay connected in any sense that you want to take it. So these are the things that you can do to help yourself and stay healthy, not just in body, but mind and spirit. Next slide. As I was mentioning before, we are all familiar with history taking, and that's what we learned the moment we entered our clinics. But here I'm talking about history taking in a different context of how we can be better communicators and how we can take a good history. So this is not about finding out the diagnosis or pathology, etc. This is about how we can do a better job of communicating with the patient. So first and foremost, greeting. The moment you have the patient and the family coming into your room, or when you go to the IP, greet them. And how can you greet them? First and foremost, make eye contact and smile and nod your head. And even if you're wearing a mask and a face shield, doesn't matter. Still smile and nod your head. People can see that. And depending on what is normal in your area of work, you can say hello, good morning, namaste, namaskaram, whatever, depending on where you're working. So this is the three essential things that you must do. And once the greeting is over, get comfortable. That is, you have to get comfortable yourself, and you have to make the patient and family also comfortable. So if they have come to the OPD, offer them a seat. And if you have gone to the IP, you pull up a chair or a stool and sit by the bedside. Get yourself also comfortable. And if, for example, if you're meeting them for the first time, after getting comfortable, you can also have an introduction. You can tell them, I am so and so. It's not enough just to tell your name. You also have to tell them that, for example, I'll say I'm Dr. Biju. I'm a pain and palliative medicine doctor. I came to see you because your treating doctor asked me to come and see you. So, and then you can ask the person what is their name and what do they do. Also ask who they are with. So there may be one or two family member or some bystanders with them. So you can ask who they are. Do not assume, ask. And start the interview with an open-ended question. You can say, so what brings you here? How can I help you? Right? Or if you have gone to the IP, you can say, how are you feeling today? Or how are you today? And once that is done, then listen. Now you have to hold yourself back because there's a good tendency to interrupt. There have been many studies which show that physicians interrupt within the first 15 seconds. So as healthcare providers, we have to learn to listen without interrupting. Next slide. And then not only you have to listen patiently, you also have to encourage the patient to talk. So how do you encourage somebody to talk? You have to maintain eye contact. You have to nod your head from time to time. And you can also make encouraging sounds like okay, and then etc. This kind of things helps them to continue whatever they were saying. And if you find something that you did not understand, clarify it then and there. Don't wait it, don't keep it for later, because sometimes you may forget, or sometimes the conversation may go to some other place where it may not be possible to clarify again. So clarify whatever you needed to clarify then and there. Ask about what they understand about the situation. For example, if they have been referred to you from somewhere else, you tell them, what did the doctor they tell you? Or what are the reports saying? So you have to understand what is their understanding about their situation. So you may realize they may perhaps understand nothing, or they may understand something which is true and a lot of things which is not true, or they may understand a lot of things which is true and some of the things which is not true, or they may understand everything which is correct. So they may be up to date. So this gives you an idea of what is their insight about the situation they are in. Along with it, you also ask them, what are they concerned? What are they worried about? What are they thinking about? What are they, scared about? Or what are they planning to do? So this kind of questioning will give you an idea of what their concerns are. Next slide, please. And once that part is done, you have to share information honestly. And when this part, we have to be careful because as healthcare providers, we have been taught medicine uh, in where a lot of terms are in Latin. And that is okay between us when we talk. But many other times, the technical jargon when we use with our patient and family, they may sit there and nod their head, but later they will say we didn't understand whatever the doctor was saying. So it is very important that we have to use simple language. For example, a USG showed a cyst in the ovary, don't worry. So that makes sense to us, but for the patient and family, they may say we paid for a scan of the stomach, but they did a test called USG, and cyst of the ovary means cancer. So they may have a lot of misconceptions about what we have told them because they don't understand our jargons. Instead of your USG showed a cyst in the ovary, we could easily say the scan of your stomach showed that there is a small swelling in the ovary, which does not seem to be too much of a problematic swelling. So if you explain things in a language that it's easier for them to understand, the chance of miscommunication and associated problems can be taken away. But that is something we have to constantly train ourselves in, that not to use jargon. And one simple way of doing that is to record whatever you are saying to patient. You can record it in your mobile phone and then listen back and find out how much of jargon you are using. And we can slowly improve ourselves by having the self-feedback. Discuss treatment options. Now, when we are discussing treatment options, do not become a waiter in the hotel who gives you a menu and says, these are the things available. You are a doctor, a healthcare provider, and you have to discuss the pros and cons of the options available. And from your point of view, what is a recommended line of treatment? It is not necessary that they will take your advice because they have their own problems and their own realities. So we have to listen to their part of the story. They may have a lot of beliefs. They may have a lot of fear. For example, many a times I came across one fear that if you take radiation, you die. That's simple. Many patients who believe that if you take radiation, you die, because they have heard from somewhere or the other there was this patient who was given radiation and the person died. Probably that person was in an advanced stage of malignancy, and then some palliative radiation was given, and over a course of time the person died. But this again is one belief and one fear that if you take it. So it is important to understand that people have their own beliefs, their own fears, their own problems. They may not have money to undergo an operation, or they may need some time to arrange resources, money for some treatment, all of that. So once you listen to them, then you can discuss what is the most practical thing. And hence we recommend decision by consensus. What that means is, just like healthcare professionals take opinion from different other specialities to come, for example, tumor board is a good example where medical oncologists, surgical oncologists, radiation oncologists, pathologists, radiologists, etc., and other surgeons, gastrosurgeons, pediatric surgeons, etc., they all come together and discuss and decide what is the best option for a certain patient. Or there can be medical boards which decide what is the best option for a patient. Similarly, once we have a medical consensus, it is important to talk to the patient and family and have a social consensus, which involves the patient, family, and maybe has an important say in the matter. And once you have a medical consensus, then you have a social consensus, and a decision by consensus is in our best interest, because whatever be the outcome, we are all equally responsible for it. And it is also important that when we take a decision by consensus, everybody understands what is the situation, what is the reality of the person's medical condition, what are the options in front of us, why we are taking the present option, and what are the possible benefits and risks, etc. So that is the advantage of taking a decision by consensus, rather than we healthcare providers taking a decision and implementing it and only asking for a consent on a piece of paper. A piece of paper with a signature in the court of law carries little weight. It is a decision by consensus which will really protect us and give us peace of mind. And once all of these things have been taken care of, in the end, summarize the interview just in a few words or few sentences. Tell them what all the decisions are, what all has been taken, and why it has been taken. Next slide. And confirm the treatment plan during the next visit, follow-up visits, that this is exactly how we are proceeding. And before the interview, before you close the interview, ask them whether they have anything else to ask or say. This is like the sweet dish or the dessert at the end of a meal. This question usually brings a smile on the face of the patient and family. When you say, is there anything else you want to ask? That is at the end, after all the discussion, just when they're getting up, just ask, is there anything else you want to say or ask? This is a very good way of ending the interview. It gives them a positive sense. They usually smile, and then you can say, okay. So in case you need to contact me, you can have this number. Please remember, if you do not want to give your personal number, don't give, but give them some number so that somebody, either you or somebody team can be contacted. And then just make eye contact and smile, nod your head, and you can say bye, good day, namaste. Or as I usually say in Malayalam, Aposheri. So that is how I am closing Aposheri. Rajlakshmi, Aposheri. So next slide.
Sir, I have changed it. Can you see it?
Sorry?
I have
Yeah,
changed this.
yeah, right. I can see that. So next slide, please. So this is where we are stopping. For next session next week, which is on 15th, that we'll be taking part 2, where we'll be talking about communicating bad news, managing collusion, and how to deal with anger. So I'm giving it back to Rajalakshmi and Sunil for the next part. Thank you.
So thank you, Biju. Rajlakshmi, is my voice audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Can you switch on my video? Okay. So Vijay was talking about basics in communication, and if any of you want to ask anything regarding the communication, please ask now.
Dr. Uma?
Or I have one more suggestion. You can send in your questions on chat, and maybe Rajlakshmi and Sunil can look up the chat box, and we can have a discussion based on what all questions are coming up.
Yes, sir, we can.
Yeah, can I go ahead and ask a doubt?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, we often face this dilemma that the patient doesn't want, the patient's attenders doesn't want the patient to know about the disease, and the treatment what we are done usually is not shared with the patient. So there's a lot of communication dilemma that whether to talk to the patient, what to explain, how to talk. So does doctor, do you have any suggestions for that part of communication?
This Dr. Ma, thank you for your question. What you're discussing is about collusion. When a family tries to collude with us to keep the patient in the dark, and we will be talking about that issue in part 2.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Vijay, there are 2 questions. One is about how to deal with the denial, and another one is suppose a patient is disinterested and he has been forced to come over. How can we start a conversation between?
Okay. So I'll talk about the first part, that is denial. Denial is it's a protective mechanism. It's a kind of a psychological shield that a person has when they are faced with very stressful situation. So denial has its uses. We need to break denial only if it is interfering in the management, and management which is in the best interest of the patient. Only that is the only indication where we have to break somebody's denial. Otherwise, most of the time, we just have to carry on with whatever regular communication and regular treatment or management we are doing for a patient who is in denial. We don't have to do much about it, because it is like crutches for a person with no legs. It is an emotional crutch. The denial is an emotional crutch which helps the person live with whatever stresses they are going on. Now, how to break a denial where it is required is again a bit of something that that involves. It's kind of a procedure which involves prolonged uh, sitting or multiple sittings with the person. It is basically listening to what they're concerned, asking questions, uh, which helps them understand that they are in this kind of situation. Uh, it is essentially uh, a lot of good listening, which helps a person come to understand that the person is in denial. If we want to do it in a way which is strong arm tactic, that you tell them on the face that this is the situation, you are in denial, you have to open your eyes and see, it only increases their stress without much of a positive outcome. That has been my personal experience. Sunil, I'll be happy if you have other insight into this matter, the denial part.
Yeah. So I agree with Pichu. The denial can be of two types. One is positive denial and the other one is negative denial. In positive denial, it is the patient's psychological mechanisms which help the patient to cope up with that situation. Patient knows that he has this problem, but he pretends that I don't know. But he will not interfere with your treatment and things like that. He will tell you, okay, I don't have any cancer or something. I don't have any problem. But if you give me any medication, I will take it. And if you want to do any treatment, you can do that. But in that is positive denial, and but in negative denial, patient won't allow you to do the treatment, or patient will not take medication. In such instances, you have to confront with the patient. And otherwise, patient will not be able to undergo the treatment or will not comply with the treatment. So in such instances, it needs to be broken.
What were the other questions, Sunil?
How to start conversation if the patient is disinterested and has been forced to come over.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there can be many ways of approaching this, but one thing that I usually employ is when I see a person who is disinterested. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. So what I do when I have a patient in my OP and that person seems to be disinterested and not very interested in answering questions and has a facial expression which tells me that person is not in a good mood, there's a good chance, it's an assumption, but there's a good chance that the patient has been brought to me not against the person's wishes. And I straight away ask the person, you seems to be not very happy here. Did I point at the family and I ask the patient in a friendly way, did they force you to come over here? So many a times it kind of breaks the ice, and sometimes the patient smiles, or sometimes the patient is still angry and says, yes, they brought me here. And sometimes the family also, they feel that they've been found out and they said, yeah, we forced them. So the outcome, somehow there is some kind of a reaction that we can create by asking like that, and that helps breaks the ice and helps you know having a conversation. And once you have a starting of a conversation, then it is of course upon your skill that how easily you can gain the trust of the person and makes them feel that even they forced me to come over here, it was a good thing that he or she landed up here. So that happens quite often uh, in my practice, and this is what I do. If somebody else has got some other tricks, I'll be happy if you would share them with me.
Any of the participants
Just
has anything to say?
hello.
Dr. Geetika?
Hello. So am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. So I would just want to ask you that if the patient has been brought forcefully and we gauge that it has been done, so does communicating with the patient in the absence of the family members to begin with have any helps us gain any edge at all?
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Geetika, for that question. The thing is, if you have a patient in the room with the family and you want to have a private conversation with the patient, and then you'll have to ask the family to go out of the room. And in our, at least in our Indian context, it is the family which usually brings the patient. So the family dynamics is such that the family is more powerful than the patient. And if we say that, please go out, I want to speak alone, that can create bit of discomfort in the family, because after all it is they who brought. So I don't know how delicate that can get. In some situations it may be, it can create a bit of a resentment. What I found best that works in breaking this situation where you have a person who is angry having been forced to come over is kind of lighten the atmosphere by saying, did they bring you forcefully, in a in a in a kind of a, what do you call, in a bit of a positively, in a positive way. It all depends on the tone that you use, so that nobody feels threatened. That is, the family does not feel threatened when you are saying, did they bring you forcefully. It is like almost like you assume the role of a old friend of the patient, even though you are meeting the patient for the first time, and you're asking like your old friend, did they bring you forcefully, with that kind of a tone. So that generally what I see is creates kind of a bit of a positive atmosphere. It kind of brings a bit of a smile in everybody's face, and helps us start a conversation and get on with it. uh, I don't know.
Thank
I
you, sir.
have never asked the family to go out of the room, because you know I always try to practice a very honest and transparent form of communication, even if it is difficult. So practicing honest and transparent communication means having everybody over there, not selectively keeping some people out and some people in. But that is my style. I guess we can have different styles of it. That's what I have to say, Dr. Geetika.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
So the one more question. Many doctors don't explain about the complications of the treatment. So if they going to explain about the complications, the patient and family will leave that hospital. So how do you manage that situation?
I think there are. I think it is problematic at many levels. For example, it is unethical not to tell them about the complications, because they have a right to do. It is also problematic at a professional level, in a sense that if you don't tell them what the complications are, especially if you're doing surgery or a non-surgical intervention, or for that matter, pharmacological management, just prescribing a drug, a medicine. If you don't tell them, and if something goes wrong, then you land in trouble. It's always best, as I said, it's always best to be honest and transparent, because then they will start trusting you. I'll give you one example of an incident that happened to me a long time back, but I remember it like yesterday. What happened was one patient was brought to me. Uh, they came looking for a pain doctor, and because the patient apparently had very severe pain in the leg, and so this patient was brought into my OP, and immediately I could see this person had a very bad gangrene foot, and it was horribly gangrenous. It was smelling like anything. It was, obviously the poor chap was in severe pain. And one look at that, and I asked him, "Didn't you go to a surgeon?" And the family told that yes, we went to the surgeon, and the surgeon took one look at the leg and said that this leg has to go. I mean, they have to cut this leg. And the family said that they ran away from that place, and then they decided to come to me for pain relief. So I sat them down, explained to them what was happening in a simple language. I told them that your leg is rotting because there is no blood supply there, and this rotten flesh will create a poison which will enter your, it is already presently entering your body, but beyond a point the level of poison will become so much that you may die with it. And the surgeon advised cutting off the leg to save your life. So this much when they understood, they took this patient back to the same surgeon. But I was left wondering, why did I had to do all this this counseling to the patient? I mean, the surgeon should have done it himself or herself. I don't know who the surgeon was. It was the duty of the surgeon to explain this much to the patient and the family. And then, they would have understood. So talking about complication, I think any complication or any management, if you want compliance, you have to be honest and transparent with it, because people understand that whether we are being honest or not. And when they feel that we are honest by the way we communicate, they will stick to us. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you, Bijo. I think we will move on to patient story, which will be presented by Dr. Praili.
Dr. Praili, can you share it from your end?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am. Hello.
Yes.
Ma'am, can you share it from your side? From here, I'm not able to share.
Okay. You can start your presentation, doctor.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Prailin, working as a junior dentist in Broadwell Krishna Hospital, Fatehpur. It is affiliated to the Emmanuel Hospital Association. Today, my patient story is about a 35-year-old female who was diagnosed with carcinoma of right side buccal mucosa, which had metastasis to the cervical lymph nodes. So she presented with a complaint of ulcer and growth in the right side cheek region for past 6 months. She also complained of severe pain in the wound site for the past 15 days, difficulty in taking food, and she also had loss of sleep. So coming to the history of presenting illness, this had started as a small ulcer 1 year back in the inner side of right cheek region, which gradually progressed to a growth which extended to the outer surface in this for the past 6 months. She was diagnosed in the nearby City Cancer Hospital as stage 4 well 6 months ago, but the patient was unwilling for any further treatment and did not return back to the hospital later. Followed by which she had started to take the treatment from a herbal center in her local village, where they had told that in a very limited time we will completely cure the cancer. They had given her 100% guarantee. So after 3 months, when there was no significant change, but only she had gradual progression of the ulcerous growth, which had come to the whole right side cheek region, which was extending below the neck. It was at this stage she had come to our department. She was very anxious and in anticipation about her severe pain, and to inquire if anything more could be done. So habit history, she had a history of taking pan and gutka 2 to 3 packets per day for the past 5 to 6 years. She said that she has quit the habit for these past 6 months after she had been diagnosed of this carcinoma. So coming to examination, extraoral examination, she had a very limited mouth opening of one finger. Even when she came inside, she had a big white color kerchief which she had covered all over the right side of the face. It was a large ulceroproliferative growth in the right side buccal mucosa, which had extended to the whole right side cheek region, extending anteriorly from the pin of the ear, posteriorly to the corner of the mouth, and inferiorly it was 2 centimeters below the angle of the mandible. The growth was very indurated and was fixed to the underlying structures. It was very tender on palpation and there was bleeding on palpation. Cervical lymph nodes were also palpable in the right side, 2 to 3 in number, which were firm in consistency. So coming to the general physical examination, the patient was severely malnourished. She was very thin built, pale, and she was very uncooperative for examination. Her vitals were within the normal limits. So treatment and significant investigation, she had undergone incisional biopsy from the right side buccal mucosa lesion before 6 months, which was reported to be well-differentiated squamous cell carcinoma of right side buccal mucosa. At the same time, CT neck was also done, which revealed metastasis to the cervical lymph nodes. Psychological aspects. When the patient had come to me, the very thing which I was able to notice is that she was in disappointment, guilt, and anger of first losing a large amount of money with no significant improvement after all 3 months of native herbal treatment. Here, this herbal treatment is very common cultural belief in this part of Uttar Pradesh, where patients tend to trust it more than the allopathic medicine because it's very easily available, and they also give false assurance to cure the cancer in a short span of time. And she also had a fear of death, mainly because this ulceroproliferative growth was there in the whole right side cheek region. It was very, very huge in size. And she had disfigurement of the face, which was also very worrying for her. Her main worry was about a family and her only daughter who's 4 years old and who was born after 11 years of marriage and after so many infertility treatments. So coming to the medications, she had not taken any medications from the hospital which she had been diagnosed. She was on medications from nearby medical shops in the village intermittently. She told me she was taking Ultracet BD, which was very insufficient to give her pain relief. So the main concern of the patient and the relatives were, they were very disappointed when I asked that because of the words of despair which had been said to the patient by the doctor, that nothing more could be done and she will die soon, please take her back home at the Cancer Institute. So she told me that the other important reason she didn't want any further treatment or care from the hospital was this. So now the family members have come here for this consultation just to know what is the better direction to move, and they desperately wanted to hear words of hope. And family members, they insisted that the patient should not be revealed about the severity and progression of the disease because she's very anxious about pain and further treatment. So to summarize, she is a 35-year-old female diagnosed with stage 4 oral carcinoma buccal mucosa 6 months back, and she had now reported to our department with main complaint of pain and growth in the right side cheek region. Her previous consultation at the cancer hospital had made her and the whole family members very anxious, and that is the main reason they had come from a very far distance from a village for this consultation to our hospital to hear words of truth and to know the better direction for them to move. So points to be discussed, like in what ways can we provide palliative care to this patient? So I was the doctor who was who was doing this consultation. Like how could have been my communication skills better so that this consultation will be effective and different one, than the previous for this anxious patient. She already know about her diagnosis, but she just wanted to hear something different from me. So in what ways could good communication help in building a relationship with this patient and his family members in order to reveal the truth better? Thank you.
Thank you, Pralin.
Thank you, sir.
So I request any of you to answer the any questions. In what ways we can provide palliative care to the patient, and how can good communication skills make the consultation more effective and different one than the previous for this anxious patient. Anybody want to try?
Dr. Savitri, yes?
Yeah. Hello. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, doctor, you are.
Hello. Regarding her, we have to give palliative care to this patient. First thing, we have to treat her severe pain. If we are treating her pain, if she feels, once the pain has come down, she will believe us for further treatment. Like then we can communicate about the prognosis of the disease. The first and foremost thing is we have to reduce her pain.
Okay. What other thing has to be done from a palliative care point of view to this patient? You have to treat pain, and anything else?
You have to improve her nutritional status. Her food intake has to be made more convenient.
Dr. Shubhra? Dr. Shubhra Raina?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to address her nutrition only. Since her mouth opening is very limited, she must not be taking adequate diet. So maybe she requires parenteral nutrition, or we can put a nasogastric tube so that gastric feeding can be done through that.
Any other aspects need to be addressed?
What about counseling for her to help her come to terms with the disease? Because she's quite upset that she's being treated for about 3 months. The initial diagnosis itself, when she was told that there's nothing could be done, must have been upsetting for her. Then in addition, the second thing was when she went to the other native herbal treater, and she spent 3 months with money and time, and the disease has just progressed. So emotionally, she must be quite, I suppose, depressed at the state of affairs, both with the physical disfigurement as well as the pain and her social circumstances where she has a young daughter. Altogether must be quite upsetting for her. So mentally also she must be, that also must be contributing to her pain.
Dr. Rashmi Shirali?
Child's tube, or whether it is any other measures of parenteral or whatever, then we take the necessary steps. But the first thing, we will need to bring her to get into a consensus decision on her treatment plan henceforth. After having done that, we would probably be able to secure her compliance and her confidence in her current state. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Biju, I lost my connection for a few seconds. So Can you try to answer the question, Bichu?
Yeah, I think the participants who have spoken are on the right track. Uh, First and foremost, we need to get her physically comfortable because physical suffering is a barrier to good communication. So when we talk about adequate pain management, uh, I would also just suggest that also look at the oral hygiene because many times we deal with a lot of oral candida and other infections which contribute to pain. We also need to find out where all she has pain and what all kinds of pains, whether it's a somatic pain or visceral pain or a neuropathic pain, or etc. etc. So that is just aside. We also need to find out whether, apart from pain, she has other physical discomfort, and basically look at it holistically that we have to get her physically comfortable, because physical discomfort is going to be a barrier to communication. Having said that, I understand that she had a bad experience with bad communication at the previous center from what has been described in the presentation that Dr. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. But Dr. Pralin, yeah. So excellent presentation, and Dr. Pralin has mentioned that what was conveyed in the previous this thing. So, and that is precisely the reason why we need to learn communication skills, because words can really cause a lot of trauma, and we may say things with the best of intention for our patients, and we may say things that we feel are the right things that we have to tell to the patient. But when it comes to very stressful information, we have to first figure out uh, whether the patient wants to know it or not. And if the patient wants to know, then how much the patient wants to know, and then give the information accordingly. It has to be a much, much more gentle process. And from what I understand, it was not a gentle process. It was quite traumatic for the patient and the family. And that is perhaps the reason why they went and, uh, rejected modern medicine and then went on for the native herbal uh, practices that is prevalent in Uttar Pradesh in that area. And subsequently, when they came back to the palliative care center, now is the time for some healing from past wounds, both physical and mental. So first, I would suggest to Dr. Pralin that, give impeccable symptomatic, palliation of the symptom, make the person comfortable, and then sit and listen. I always say sit and listen. Both words are important, sit and listen. And when you allow the person to ventilate, you allow them to talk about whatever they want to talk about. That will also include a little bit of crying and maybe getting angry, allowing ventilation of emotions in the form of words, tears, and anger. It has a healing property, and the bonus is you will get a lot of information along with it. And once that has happened, you can always ask them, what is it that you want us to do? So there are two parts to it. First, understand what is it that they understand about the situation from all their past experiences. And the second thing that we have to ask them is, what is it that they want us to do? Essentially, we're asking them, how do you want us to help you? And then they may come up with whatever they come into mind, or they may say, we don't know, you tell us. And that is the point where you should have a transparent and honest sharing of information, that this is the situation that we are in, and this is what we can do, and this is what we can't do. Now I'll end up with something that I do very often. People come to me in usually with an advanced stage of disease. Either it could be advanced stage of COPD or advanced interstitial lung disease or advanced motor neuron disease or advanced cancer. So what I tell people, of course this is not, I'm not saying in just one or two lines that I'm saying over here. It is a different way of saying it with the patient. But what I'm trying to convey to all of you listening over this webinar is that what I tell them is, okay, you have a problem which is incurable and is fairly advanced, but I will make sure that you do not suffer. I tell them, I do not know many things, but the only thing I know is making sure that people do not suffer. And I promise you, I'll make sure you do not suffer till the last day of your life. Or I say, I'll make sure you do not suffer for as long as you are alive. Now, when I tell them, most of the time, people just grab my hand and say, I just wanted to hear that. The family members also say that that's all that we want to hear, doctor. So there is a lot of power that you have within you when you say, even though we can't do much about your disease, but we still can do a lot making sure that you are comfortable. This is something that I want you to take away from today's session. There is no situation, unlike what was told there, nothing more from my side. There is no situation where something cannot be done to make sure that they are not suffering. There is no situation like that where something cannot be done. I think I'll stop.
Okay. So this patient needs palliative care. We don't have any doubt. But from the physical point of view, she has severe pain. You have to manage that. From a psychological point of view, patient is has guilt and the problems due to disfigurement and angry. All this need to be taken care of. And from the social and financial point of view, from a poor family who spend a lot of money, so they have to have some support for that also. Then from the daughter who is 4 years old need to be taken care of. The patient might be thinking of the what will happen to my baby after my death. She will not be able to go to school, something like that. So you can get the help of some NGO or somebody else to take care of the education of this child. I don't know whether what will be her feelings due to disfigurement. It was the foul smell. All this will make her isolated. Even she may not be approaching her husband thinking that will this foul smell going to cause some problem with the husband or neighbors or friends. So all this need to be taken care of. And as Biju told, it is we have to give a message that you are not going to suffer, and we will do all the possible things to make you comfortable. And maybe I think for the when you saw this patient, you should be telling an empathetic statement to this patient, like, okay, I see that you are in a lot of suffering. Right now, you are in severe pain. Shall I try to reduce your pain, and then we will talk more about your suffering. Then we will, so that when you communicate that, the patient and family understand that, okay, you are genuinely concerned about the suffering of the patient, and the severe pain you will take care of. And once you do that, the patient and family will have a positive impact, and they will trust you. Okay, this doctor is going to help us. Then that's the time, or that's how you have to make a good relationship with this patient and family, so that they will trust you. Whatever you tell regarding the treatment or regarding palliative care or uh, things like incurability of the disease, etc. So you need to give a realistic hope to the patient, uh, because this patient's disease is not curable. So it is important to provide truth to the patient, but it is also important to provide it in a useful way uh, uh, to the patient and family. So in the other hospital, it was given as a sudden traumatic, or it was a traumatic incident for the patient and family. But you will not do such things when a patient comes to you. And we will hear about how you will communicate bad news in the coming session. So uh, uh, I think that's how we can uh, help this patient and family. Shailin, is that okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Congratulations, Pralin. That was a very nice presentation. And
Yes,
and
sir.
just
Thank
stop calling ourselves practitioners of allopathy. We are not allopathic practitioners. We are practitioners of modern medicine.
Yes, sir.
Allopathy was what was practiced in the pre-industrial time in the European area, where allopathy, allo was the other, pathy was the suffering. The first pathy was the disease or the trauma, and the second pathy was the treatment, like chopping of the leg without anesthesia, right? So, or burying the hole in the head to for psychiatric problems. So that was very unscientific. So after industrial revolution, when science got mixed with medical practice, it became modern medicine. So don't call yourself practitioners of allopathy. We are practitioners of modern medicine.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good job.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Biju, let's wind up this session. And thank you for being with us today, and for the wonderful session. And thank you, Prailin, for a very good patient story